Earlier today, Rachel Reeves announced Labour's revenue-raising plan after the government stole their non-dom policy. They will go even harder on tax dodgers, says the shadow chancellor. Yet there's no mention of what they'll do with the alleged tax dodger at the heart of their own party. But you know the left, folks. One rule for us, another one for them. Rejoining me now in the studio, writer and broadcaster Cant Do That and barrister and commentator Stephen Barrett. Thank you very much indeed for returning to us. This story is the story that just won't die. You know, it's just like one of those kind of Halloween horrors that keeps coming up out the grave just when you think it's safe to walk past the graveyard. Angela Rayner comes out and starts swearing at you, calling you Tory scum, even all the while making money from capital gains tax. Who would have thought that somebody in her position would think that making money from property was a good thing? I thought all property was theft.
Well, exactly. I mean, hasn't she even spoke about getting rid of the right to buy? Yet
she has indeed. That's how this story started, because people said, look at the hypocrisy of this woman. She made a load of money from selling a house, and now she wants to do away with the right to buy a grant. And then they started looking into it, and they went, hang on a minute, she wasn't actually living there at the time.
Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to be asking these questions. I mean, they've sort of batted it back, saying it's just a smear and I'm perfectly entitled to my own living arrangements. But most people would look at that and go, that's slightly unusual.
Yes.
It doesn't quite make sense. And then, of course, you have neighbours who've said, well, I don't remember her living there.
Right.
And you've got the Mail Online, who's now done this big investigation into her social media posts, which overwhelmingly seemed to suggest that she was living at one property. But, I mean, she's stonewalling. Yeah. Rachel Reeves is stonewalling.
Rachel Reeves basically said today, from what I can gather, that she hasn't evaded tax because she's my friend, which doesn't really stand up. I'm interested in your point of view on this, Stephen, because I think you tweeted about this before, because people are also saying Keir Starmer is claiming that he hasn't looked at the guidance that she got in order that he can avoid sort of having to say that he's got plausible deniability, effectively. You've got a sort of legal point that you can make about that, haven't you?
Yes, well, I mean, the first one is to say that the consistent applications of rules to us all is the rule of law. And the rule of law is not a natural human state. It isn't just how we are by default. It takes an awful lot of work to maintain it. The natural human because we're just a socialised ape. And the natural human default is...
Some are more socialised than others.
Well, that's very kind. But the natural state is ruled by violence, by strength, and that's how you get what you want. And we have an inverse version of that in this country, because nobody uses actual violence, but passive aggression, claiming to be victim, is used an awful lot in order to subvert the rule of law. Now, what Keir Starmer is doing would be rejected by a court, because he's almost trying to put himself into a situation of deliberate ignorance. You know, you cannot avoid knowing things. If you were perfectly, you know, you're the boss of the ship, and there's a report, and you're saying, oh, I'm not going to read the report. No, you can't do that. No,
you just can't. And surely at some point or other, and this is what always happens with these types of political stories, eventually, I mean, Alistair Campbell was the man who said, you know, if you're the story for 6 days, it's time to resign. I mean, this has been far longer than 6 days. I think she hasn't spoken publicly to the media for something like 11 or 12 days. And it just, you know, they keep pretending that it's all going to go away, and it keeps not going away.
Yeah, they're hoping it will go away. I mean, I bet they are so angry that this has come up.
Yeah.
Because they were just sort of hoping they could step back, not have to do much. The Conservatives were making so many unforced errors. But this is actually quite a serious thing. And it does get someone at the highest levels of the party on serious hypocrisy charges, not to mention other things which can only speculate.
Well, an awful lot of people who were put up by Labour this morning, apart from Rachel Reeves, to appear, I think there was a guy on TalkTV breakfast this morning, Peter Cardwell was talking to him, and he said, well, what about Angela Rayner? You know, since you're announcing this non-dom tax thing, what about your own tax dodger? And immediately they're on the back foot. So they, you know, you have to say if you're a team manager, you're we're not getting the message out because of you, because of your problem.
Well, I mean, I don't... under the old system, I would never really talk about a political party, because we used to have a law that they just governed themselves and they weren't subject to the courts, and they, you know, we just put them over there away from law. And then that wall cracked during membership of the EU. And now we use the courts to interfere in political parties. So they're becoming much more
and
like...
during the Brexit period as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I do this now for a living. I will sue the political parties for my clients because I now can in a way that previously I wasn't.
And is that a bad thing, you think, that's happened?
Well, it's a political position to say whether it's good or bad. So all I can ever do is highlight that our old system is... And it wasn't... I don't think it was consciously done. I'm not sure people understood. What they wanted was to have one system across Europe.
Yes.
And we just had a totally different system and sort of never said, oh, we're terribly sorry, but that doesn't actually work for us.
Right.
You know, because how Europe works, so it wasn't really done. And ever since then, nobody has sort of shored up that. We could, if we wanted to, have that barrier up again. And say that political parties are non-justiciable, and that would end a bit of my practice overnight. But you know, there we are. It doesn't matter. We don't govern for my benefit. But yeah, they're becoming law. So I will talk about the parties. And I will talk about constitutions. And I think there's a structural issue in the Labour Party constitution because she's directly elected, and so I don't think Starmer can sack her.
Right.
So I think, again, she just sat there going, well, I'm not resigning.
Right.
You can't sack me.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then you see that once all these people who believe in one single document constitution, well, let's use the political parties, because they've all got one single document constitution, to point out how badly that system works.
Yes,
I mean, that's quite a
Well, I mean, I think
problem.
at one point there was a talk that he was trying to move her at the last reshuffle, wasn't there? And then there was a bit of a stramash behind the scenes.
Yes.
Suddenly she had another job and she still had the old job. You know, so she'd be made sort of, you know, deputy head of the party or something, in addition to being the deputy leader. But that's the other issue that people mistake, and I think David Lammy made a mistake on this when he said the other day, oh, well, we should be held to a different standard because we're not in government. You know, sorry? No. So how does that work?
Would he apply that to
Does that mean, you know, the further down the pecking order you are in Parliament, the more you can get away with? That's ridiculous.
I mean, that reasoning, it's just nuts. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you are the party in waiting, that you need lots of scrutiny.
Yeah.
We need to know what we're going to be getting or what we're going to be voting for.
And also, as a party and as a party leader, you ought to want to be as clean as you can possibly be. You don't want to be going into a general election with some dodgy characters who might have got some stuff in the background that you don't want to publish.
It's true, but I think, you know, I think in some ways, though, this is Angela Rayner being hoisted by her own petard.
Yes.
Because, I mean, she's often led the charge against other politicians from the other side. And, I mean, in a very inquisitorial way. And so, you know, it's sort of being turned back on her now. And we've entered this sort of, this type of politics now, where it's sort of, you know, my opponent isn't just different to me, my opponent is something morally repugnant. And I always have to hold them to account. They're always disgraceful and corrupt. And I think that she kind of does belong to that style of politics.
I think so. We'll probably explore this a bit more later, but just a quick mention of William Bragg, who's resigned this evening as a Tory MP. He's resigned the whip, apparently. As a senior Tory who's apparently said William Bragg has to sack himself because Rishi Sunak isn't strong enough to do it. There's a lot of sort of runes to be looked through here, isn't there? Can you sum it up for us, Stephen, in about 20 seconds?
Well, I mean, we are in a situation where an MP who was quite influential within the Conservative Party constitution, quite powerful on the 1922 committee, and we had a Prime Minister with a massive majority thrown out the window. Yeah. And this gentleman with his photograph is connected to this in some way, and you know, I mean, when I was a child, I think people would have just said this is a national security issue. Right. There would be sort of MI5.
Yeah, how can it not be?
I mean, I don't.
The police are now involved.
So, I mean, and I wouldn't want to comment on ongoing matters, but I can merely highlight that this is not unserious in any way. No. Yet very little action had been taken, and it's taken a very long time to get to the point of him removing the whip. Yes. I mean, that from himself.
Well, quite extraordinary, wasn't it, for Jeremy Hunt to call him brave for managing to cough up to having committed such a ridiculous and gross error, as you say, possibly damaging our national security. But we'll talk more about that coming up. Candice and Stephen, thank you very much indeed.